My name is Chloe Henson. I'm with the Climate Justice Alliance, and as the moderator of this event, I want to welcome everyone and thank you for joining us for this important conversation. This event was originally focused on demilitarization and feminist climate solutions, co-sponsored by the Grassroots Global Justice Alliance, the Climate Justice Alliance, and La Via Campesina. In the event of the siege on Gaza this past October and the ongoing genocide, our partners GGJ and La Via Campesina decided to honor the call from the Palestinian BDS movement to boycott COP for the platform it is offering Israel. Our partners, however, recognize that this is an important arena and know that many of us are right now engaging in interventions to confront Israel's greenwashing of its war crimes and to uplift the voices and reality of Palestinian people. So, in collaboration with our partners, we decided to pivot and focus this event still on demilitarization, climate justice, and feminist solutions, but with a particular eye on the genocide and occupation of Palestine, and to speak about colonialism as a root cause of genocide and climate crisis. So on this panel, you're going to hear from some Palestinian leaders, indigenous leaders, and people impacted by war and militarism, as well as hear solutions that address the intersections of demilitarization, feminism, and climate justice. So today you will hear from Tarek Luthan with Friends of the Earth Palestine, Julia Bernal from Pro Action Alliance, Claire Charlo with the Indigenous Environmental Network, Rania Harara with Young Arab Feminist Coalition, and we'll also be joined soon by Heather Milton-Lightning. So I will briefly introduce each panelist and they will share their remarks. Then we'll have a discussion, and after the discussion we'll open up to hear questions and insights on the needs for just feminist solutions and demilitarization to free Palestine and all oppressed people. So to begin with, we have some framing remarks from Jamal Juma, a leading grassroots organizer since Palestine's first intifada in 1987. Jamal is coordinator of the Palestinian Grassroots Anti-Apartheid Wall Campaign, also known as Stop the Wall Coalition. Jamal is the secretariat and a founding member of the Palestinian BDS National Committee, the broadest Palestinian civil society coalition that leads the global boycott, divest, sanctions movement. He will share the context of the genocide and occupation of Palestine and the political moment.
Comrades in struggle in Grassroots Global Justice Alliance, social movements, environmental movements, all civil society organizations, and movement participating in COP28 for one reason or another. I'm really addressing you after like almost 24 hours of resuming bombing in Gaza. Bombing in Gaza this time became much more worse than the first time. Like, it's shocking me yesterday that one bomb that thrown in Gaza killed at the same minute 250 people and another 1,000 missing. Missing means under the rubble, means that they are killed, means that 1,250 people killed in one bomb that has been just provided by the American army to the Israelis, which they provide for the Israeli military, 100 of them, of these bombs that they start bombing the civilians in Gaza. Gaza became like a river of blood. The genocide continues and worse than it had been started. They are bombing all over Gaza now. And clearly from all what they are declaring and announcing that they are pushing the people more toward the south, but not the south of Gaza. It's like to the south, to the entrance of Gaza with Egypt. Means that they are insisting and they are still planning strongly to either eliminate Gaza or the people of Gaza must flee to Egypt. It is genocidal war, it's ethnic cleansing, it's multiple crimes against humanity that's committed now in Gaza Strip. West Bank, I would say, It's not just it's not as worse as in Gaza, but it's also like a very terrible situation is going on there. Attacking people, farmers, Bedouin communities. They already until now 17 Bedouin communities that they were evacuated and they ethnically cleansed from Area C. Area C is totally closed. Roads, we can't drive on roads because it's very dangerous where the settlers are standing with their guns and backed by the soldiers. They can shoot anybody, can be killed for any reason that they can say and they can create. People start moving between the cities and villages in mountains areas. They started to create their own ways how to communicate, but still the situation is very dangerous. 70% of the olive trees in the West Bank didn't harvest because they can't, because the settlers is attacking the people. They are destroying the trees, cutting it, they are stealing the product, doing it by themselves. They are killing any Palestinian farmer who come close or try to go to his field to pick his olives. So when we talk about ethnic cleansing, genocide in Gaza, there is also a plan of ethnic cleansing in the West Bank is going on. In this context, just like takes us back 75 years ago, means that the Nakba didn't finish in their minds. And the ethnic cleansing of 85% of the Palestinians in 48 is still, this is continue, and it seems that they are planning this to be the second Nakba for the Palestinians, where they can get rid of as much as they can from the West Bank and Gaza, and we don't know from 48 as well.
So now we will hear from Tarek, who is a Palestinian poet and community organizer from Friends of the Earth Palestine.
Hey everybody, and if you'd like, feel free to come and sit in the center, just so we can all face each other at the same time. I'm here for a number of reasons, but first and foremost, I wanted to reiterate what Jemad is saying about the boycotting of spaces like this. I don't want to be here, nor do I think that I should when I think about the ways in which the spaces like this are sanitized. They're difficult for us to say certain things without being debadged, to be able to speak truth to power in terms of what is happening. As we speak, Palestinians are being killed, not just in Gaza, but also on the West Bank. When we think of the ways in which settlers are being empowered to have, there have been literal events in which weaponry has been handed out to settlers to empower them in order to kill Palestinians. And so a lot of what we're seeing in Gaza is just a continuation of the violence we've been seeing for the past 75 years. The Nakba never ended. It has simply evolved into a more fast-paced version of the genocide that has been executed upon my people for many decades. And so when we think about climate justice, when we think about spaces and trying to ensure that spaces like this cater towards life, cater towards a world in which all people can live and inhabit it freely, safely, free from any kind of harm, whether that harm be environmental or otherwise, it seems relatively disingenuous to walk around amongst others as they deal and make negotiations and whatnot while people are getting killed and slaughtered. And so I could tell you a bunch of numbers, I could tell you statistics all day, but I think we all know what the statistics are. I think they're helpful in terms of arguments, but really what I want to do here is couch us in a rhetoric around humanity, a rhetoric rooted in sparing life, and that means, for me, I believe in systemically approaching problems in a way that if it spares at least one life, it's a good solution, and if spare multiple lives is a better solution, spare all lives is the perfect solution. And so when we think about what's happening in Gaza, Palestine more broadly, there are a number of issues that are directly tied to climate. I mentioned this in a press conference a couple of days ago. Palestinians, Gazawiya, only get about 3 liters of water per day, per person, since October 7th, and that's an old statistic. None of us get water really at all when you think about the facts we've been moving from school to hospital to different places across the streets in order to avoid being bombed to death. And so prior to October 7th, the number for people in Gaza in terms of the water they were receiving was 88 liters per person per day. The World Health Organization's minimum, the bare minimum, is 100 liters of water per person per day, while Israelia enjoy 230 liters of water per person per day, which is almost more than double that number. And so we see ways in which water and the access to water, a fundamental human right, is actually not executed in a way that is just or systemically geared towards people's lives. This is the very definition of apartheid, right? To be of one community and getting limitations put upon you simply because you exist in a certain body, in a certain mode, in a certain space. And to take it a step further, if we are just to isolate the violence we see to what was happened since October 7th, the bombing of buildings in and of itself releases asbestos into the air. It destroys the concrete and poisons the land. The bombs themselves are full of chemicals. Israeli occupation forces have been using tactics like the dropping of white phosphorus for years. White phosphorus burns the flesh, it kills people, it harms people, but it also poisons the land itself. And so white phosphorus is released on the land, it actually poisons that land, it makes it infertile. And so what we're talking about is creating an environment in Palestine and Gaza where if you are not killed directly by a bullet or a bomb, your land is made uninhabitable, so therefore you are forced to flee, forced to leave, and that in and of itself is a form of ethnic cleansing as well. Actually, the definition of genocide is not simply the killing of people, but it is the killing of culture, the killing of community. And so for somebody to be extricated from a space simply because there were coercive tactics placed around them to make their lives uninhabitable and force them to flee in and of itself is also genocide. Genocide does not you do not need to be a victim of genocide only through death. You can be a victim of genocide by simply being forced to flee your space, forced to flee the life you exist in through your culture. So, sorry, there's like lights in my eyes. I'm not sure how to make eye contact with all of you. So that's just some of like the direct climate implications of what we're seeing in the latest military aggression on Ghazawiyya. But we've also seen so many stories in which bulldozers are run through the olive trees to destroy them and uproot them from the land. There's a chef. His name is Fadi Katan. He is a chef from Bethlehem, and I went to a conference just a week before this all started on October 7th, and he was talking about the ways in which Israeli policies make it impossible for Palestinians to access their land. There are loopholes where, for example, if you are an olive tree farmer or you want to do a harvest of olive trees, they have these statutes where if you don't access your olive trees or your farm within 5 to 6 years, or it becomes dormant for a couple of years, they then execute a seizure of your land. And what will happen is you'll see that when you used to be able to access your farm by walking to your farm, taking your family, making it a family affair, over time what would happen is you'd see settlers all across the land on the way to the farm, which means it's a little less responsible, a little more dangerous for you to take your family and have a family harvest, right? We're taking our culture away, but not allowing us to have the olive tree harvests anymore. And so therefore this family affair now becomes this thing where maybe the fathers go to do it because it's such a high risk. But then you see that IOF will set up checkpoints, or they'll say, actually, you can't access your farm from this entry point, the one you can drive a car to. You actually have to get out of your car and then walk around multiple miles to the other entrance to the olive farm, right? And then you can only carry back as much as you can carry back on your back in a bag. And so these limitations are forced upon us, one, in order to humiliate and embarrass Palestinians, but also, two, most importantly, to discourage us from engaging in the practice. Because at a certain point, what yield can you get when all you can have from your olive trees is a bushel or so of olives, and maybe the next year you're a little less optimistic about the yield. Maybe the next year after that you're a little more tired about having to navigate maybe being lynched by a settler, maybe being harassed by a settler, maybe not being able to have a yield that was fair in terms of the effort you put into getting to your farm in the first place. And so it is little things like this where violence is executed in the form of actual military aggression, but also in the form of policies that make it almost impossible for Palestinians to exist in their lands. And I think we've all seen like these quotes and these posts on Instagram, which is, if you ever need to know who is oppressed or who is actually, if you ever need to know who is truly indigenous to the land, look at who cares for it. And then if you ever need to know who is oppressing that space and oppressing the people in it, look at who's willing to maim the land, harm the land, destroy the land. And so we're seeing a lot of violence executed against Ghazawiya. My big fear, as we advocate for a ceasefire, but ultimately more broadly advocate for an end to the siege in Gaza, and also more broadly after that, ending an occupation in general, I worry about the trauma Palestinians will have to live through and grow up through, as roughly half of our population is children. And then also what kind of land will we have access to, and what kinds of crops can we grow, what kinds of things can we actually yield from the property, when we think of all of the chemicals and the sheer devastation that's been wreaked upon Palestine, not just in Gaza, but more broadly in the West Bank. And as we're seeing now, there's attacks happening in the south, there's things happening in Jenin. And so it's a very difficult situation to navigate. I'm sure there's more I can say later. I'm rambling, I apologize for that. But I encourage you to keep on looking into the work of Jamal, Ayman, Nijim, and some other folks like Fadi. They offer some very precise accounts of what's happening, some more statistics if those are things you're interested in. But ultimately, as an organizer, I'm based in Detroit, Michigan. I'm lucky. Yeah, Detroit, Michigan, ooh. And so part of me being here, right, I want to make this clear too. I'm not here in order to break a boycott. I'm here just because there is a faction of people here to greenwash what's happening. I don't know how a certain entity can show up in this space and show its face in this space and talk about I've heard enough. We've got some footage of some of the events that have been happening, and in every opportunity, you do not hear a single mention of the word Palestine. You do not hear a single mention of the word Palestinians. And so even in the events that are happening here by the occupying regime, it's as if we don't exist. And they want to ensure that remains the case. And so in order to combat that, it was important for me to be here as a Ghazawi, as somebody who has a US passport, which affords me some privileges in the UAE, to be able to say and speak to the truth of what's happening. Anyways, all that is to say, there's a lot for us to dissect. I encourage you all to keep on sharing the information that you learned here today. Share it with somebody you do not know. If you meet a new friend here, ask them where they stand on Palestine. Ask them where they stand on just making an equitable and just world for all people, because you cannot have climate justice without human rights. And I think it's disingenuous for us to be in a space like this and not at the very least acknowledge this genocide as it happens before our eyes. But there's also so many other things happening. In Sudan, the water has been poisoned. When we think of, I remember in the initial onslaught in Sudan, people were saying that the rivers were full of blood, right? Things like that are happening across the world. As Ghazawiya, we are uniquely aware of how we are in a moment where we have a lot of attention on us because of the pace of this genocide, but we're also, as Ghazawiya, as myself as an organizer, always going to keep trying to draw attention to all the things happening across the world as well, because the only way we can free each other is to free ourselves in unison, and liberation for one is liberation for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Tarek. Next, we will hear from Julia Bernal. Julia is from the Indigenous Nations of Sandia Pueblo and Yuchi. They are the executive director of the Pueblo Action Alliance, and here with the Indigenous Environmental Network delegation and the Ring of Fire cohort. She is pursuing a dual master's degree in water resources and community and regional planning at the University of New Mexico. She advocates for water back, land back, the rematriation of all stolen water sources and ancestral lands, and the demodification of all that is sacred.
Thank you, Chloe. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming to this very, very important conversation. I'll just share a bit about the region that I'm coming from. As mentioned, I'm from Sandia Pueblo, and we're one of the 19 pueblos in the state of New Mexico in the so-called Southwest, but our region has been historically a sacrifice zone for resources, for weapons manufacturing that contribute to the war crimes that we are discussing here today in Palestine and across the globe. We have been extracted for uranium mining, oil and gas, and currently hold 2 national laboratories that test and manufacture weapons of mass destruction, which has induced a lot of harm on our people. So uranium mining was booming in New Mexico during the Manhattan Project in the 1950s, and was utilized at the Los Alamos National Labs in New Mexico, where the first atomic bomb was constructed. And in Tularosa, New Mexico, also the first atomic bomb was detonated in that region, which is now causing a lot of health impacts because radiation is very, very strong in that region. I tend to not even go in that area because we come back and we feel like extremely ill, and so there's a lot of concerns for the well-being of frontline communities in that region. And now, because of the economy around nuclear energy, nuclear waste is also a very large issue. A lot of times this waste is stored next to indigenous people's lands, and there are actually now pending permits to start venting tritium waste, which violates a lot of US policy around the Clean Water Act, because tritium has an affinity to water. And so next to Los Alamos National Labs, there is the largest earthen dam, Cochiti Dam, that is supposed to help control the floodplain in the middle Rio Grande Valley of New Mexico. And sediment samples containing plutonium and uranium had already been discovered even during the Manhattan Project in the 1940s and 1950s. And studies of radionuclides have been collected in bed sediment at this dam, and also fish tissue. And so conversations that are had here about decommissioning dams would simply just be a catastrophe if all of that radioactive sediment and fish tissue were to come down to communities like mine that are downstream. And this is all along the Rio Grande River, which is a river that we hold sacred, is a place where me and my siblings go to play and pray. So in New Mexico, there's also 16 Superfund sites, and neighboring our tribe is Albuquerque, New Mexico, and this is the largest city in New Mexico where the Kirtland Air Force Base is currently located, and also where a jet fuel spill happened, which created a Superfund site. And this jet fuel plume has caused high numbers of cancer. At one point, there was a high rate of blue baby syndrome, which is where mothers who drink the water where this jet fuel plume was contaminating the groundwater aquifer, they were consuming high concentrations of nitrates, which cause babies to turn blue when they're born. And also in that region is Isleto Pueblo, which is where my brother-in-law was from, and he died of a rare form of cancer at only 23 years old, and I do truly believe that it is the contamination that has caused his illness, and many members of my family also experience thyroid-related issues. And so, you know, this is just one example of how military and militarization contributes to the health impacts and also to the climate crisis that we are here to discuss currently. And as many of you in this room probably know, that military emissions are not counted in the global emissions count that is contributing to climate change. And so it is really important for us to bring into these conversations around demilitarization and the climate change, as all of these issues are really intersectional. And, I just want to say that while it seems to be like a really interesting and contentious issue to talk about Palestine, but we as indigenous peoples in the U.S. have a responsibility to stand in solidarity with Palestine, as we as indigenous people in the belly of the beast are contributing to the weapons and genocide that is happening there and across the world. So thank you.
Thank you, Julia. Next up, Claire Charlo from the Bitterroot Salish Nation of the Flathead Reservation in Montana. Claire works for the Indigenous Environmental Network as the Indigenous Feminist Organizer.
Heschilu, Claire Charlo, Louis Quest, Chines Lemty, at Faustet. Thank you. My name is Claire Charlo. I'm happy to be here. I am the Indigenous Feminist Organizer for Indigenous Environmental Network, and I think Tariq covered a lot of information, and I want to echo what Julia said about solidarity. I think that it's really important to look back at how traditionally in Indigenous communities, generally Indigenous women got to this, had a say on whether or not the men went to war, because the women and children were the most impacted. And so it was very important to go to the matriarchs, the women, the elders, to get their opinion. And that it wasn't just an advisory council. If they said no, it was no. Now we're in a time where patriarchy, capitalism, and colonialism have taken over the world. The situation in Palestine is a direct result of colonialism, patriarchy. I just want to highlight that there is a media blackout, and it's really important. The only action item I really have is you can buy Simile and Nomad. Simile, actually, I recommend because all the proceeds go to Gaza and the West Bank. But it helps people get access to Wi-Fi. And at this moment, it's very important that we have our eyes on Palestine and West Bank. And I also appreciate Tariq mentioning Sudan. That came up this morning in the Women and Gender constituency, that we all need to stand with all of the oppressed around the world, that what we're seeing in Palestine is happening, all over the world, Sudan, Darfur. There are so many countries in which human trafficking and slavery and, horrific colonial impacts that are devastating communities. They're kidnapping, raping, and trafficking children, women, and men. And I just want to highlight all that. So I really don't have much more to say. I really want to hear from our relative, from Rania. I would really like to hear from you and Heather. So I just want to give the space to y'all. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. And next, I'll pass it to Heather Milton Lightning to introduce yourself and give your opening remarks.
Sorry, I'm kind of a hot mess. I'm from Canada. I'm actually from Treaty 4 territory, which is the southern part of Saskatchewan, a little bit of Alberta, and a little bit of Manitoba. If you were following the Standing Rock, no DAPO things that were happening, I'm about 7 hours straight north. We have the same oil deposit, which is the Balkan, in our territory. We have a lot of oil and gas, all kinds of fun things. my apologies for being late. I'm actually here doing a lot of art stuff and action stuff, so I'm covered in paint and really sweaty, and I'm from Canada, it's really hot. So my apologies for being late. This is really important to me for a multitude of different reasons. I think the one thing, I was talking with a speaker from Toronto with the Palestinian Youth Movement, and they've just been really kicking ass in Canada in terms of organizing. And I'm just like always blown away with the Palestinian organizers that I know in Canada that are super, super organized. Their language, the way they articulate the political language and the way they're organizing, it's just very principled, but also like, I'm just always amazed by them. But it also just feels like really not okay that we have to be in this moment. Because I think for a lot of us as Indigenous people, this is a reaction for me. Because it's awakening this memory that we have of the genocide that happened to our own people. And it's been really difficult to get people in Canada, Indigenous people, to stand up and fight because they don't want to be anti-Semitic. They don't want to call out Israel. They don't want to hurt other people's feelings. And they don't understand like the differentiation, right? And I think we've been really trying to educate our own people and bring them in. And I think, like, to me, there's no question, it's a genocide. You know, like, there's no question about that. And I think the thing that I think about is that I really would have hoped when that happened to our people that somebody would have stood up for us, right? You know, and I think that's our responsibility as Indigenous people to stand up for others, because we know we were an experiment, right? I got to travel to Palestine a few times with an organization called Eyewitness Palestine. And it left a really deep impression because I seen all of the tactics that were used on our people, but like on steroids, right? Like with technology and all these crazy things happening. But it was so deeply familiar. And I think that's the thing that's really difficult and really hard to wrap our minds around because it's really emotional for a lot of us. That being said, I think the thing that I feel really difficultly challenged on top of this is that being from a northern country, you know, there's a whole group of them that are former British colonies, right? And we understand that Britain had a role in Palestine, and particularly the country that I'm from. They actually helped create the political landscape for the Nakba in 1948, and it's not talked about. And I think the thing is we're so focused on, you know, countries south of us and in Europe and in other places, but not taking responsibility for my country did. And I think that's the thing that I feel most frustrated is that, you know, they're actively helping others be settler colonial, right? And do these horrible things to other countries. And I think that's the thing that I feel most responsible for is really at home being able to call out our own country, not only for what it's done to us, but what it's doing all over the globe. And I think it's really difficult in these spaces because often people think that the country that I come from is multicultural. You know, it respects human rights. It does all of these projects all over the globe. You know, it's a really good country to move to, you know, and get a good job, you know, all of these things, right? But yet we're not post-colonial, you know? We're not in this space where Indigenous rights are respected, right? And I think the thing that I think about a lot is the relationship in Canada all over the globe with mining companies. We have the most genocidal mining companies that are contained politically within Canada, right? And I think that's the thing that I really want people to understand is that Canada has a deep role in what's happening in Palestine, even though they don't want to say it. I also feel that, you know, it has a long history. And it's so interesting as we were starting to do research, we were trying to really dig into the issues so we could educate our own people. And like, knowing that the Toronto airport is named after someone that helped create the Balfour Declaration, right? They're from Canada, you know, and I think that's really interesting to me that, you know, there's these historic relationships, and yet it's still going on. You know, there's a lot of organizing in Canada by BDS, particularly on university campuses, and all it takes is for organizations to call up and make a complaint, and the university complies, right? And we've seen a lot of young people getting harassed that are doing this work. You know, we've seen people be targeted in Canada for this work. And it's really frustrating because, again, it's like this idea of like, oh, we're so great, we do all of these things. But I think on the flip side, the one thing that we were talking about too is that, you know, I seen a meme, you know, we've been asked to witness, right, and not look away. I've really been trying my best every day in the morning to like open up Al Jazeera and watch Al Jazeera in the morning, because that's like, our media is really bad at home. It's really, really very skewed, even though they say that they're not. And I think the other thing is to look on Instagram and social media and be watching the stories and following all the things. And I think one thing that really stood out to me is that, you know, Palestine is freeing us. And I really believe that, because I've seen so many people I didn't expect organize. You know, I've seen people in my own territory do arrestable actions, you know, and that doesn't happen where I come from. Like, if you know the US, it's they're very conservative states, similar where I come from. And so to take a stand can be a really scary thing, you know. And I know Claire alluded to it, but where I come from, there was a young man named Colton Bushy who was shot by a settler, a farmer, point blank in the head. And he got away with it, didn't do any jail time, but there was also a crowdsource that was created for him. And all the other people, you know, settlers, et cetera, supported him. And so the man who murdered a young Indigenous man, he got $150,000 off a crowdsource, right? And so that kind of gives you an understanding of the political climate where I come from, is that, you know, it's okay to shoot Indigenous people. It's okay to murder Indigenous young people and women and children and those in the broader gender spectrum where I come from. It's okay, you can get away with it. You know, our bodies are still not considered worth anything, you know, within this political body. And so I think when I come back to this idea of Palestine is freeing us, you know, I know that our people are really powerful. I know that Palestinians are really powerful. And I know that people that are grounded in their land and their ceremony and their knowledge and connection to the land are really powerful. And that's us. And I really believe that's why the government has been, all over the globe, different governments have been really oppressive, because we really are powerful. And that's what I keep telling young people, like, we're powerful. We have the ability to change the future. We have the ability to change the way people live in our territories. We just have to take that power back into ourselves, right? And where I come from, they stole our children for 150 years. And, you know, it's been beaten into us to believe that the government and these systems are for us, and they're not. And I think, like, this is why I go back to this idea that Palestine is really freeing us, because it's showing us, it's taking the veil off of these countries and saying, like, these are active colonizers. These are active settlers who don't care and who are super ultra violent. And we're seeing it in live time. And I think that's really, this moment is really critical for all of us to help wake up other people. And I think that's the thing that I struggle with. It shouldn't never be this violent, you know? And I think in Canada, you know, we have a privilege of being in this weird area where it's still dangerous to be Indigenous, but like we're not being oppressed in the same way, where people are like, the army's coming in the same way, or the military. It's not the same. But it's still oppression, right? Because we still don't have our land back. We still can be murdered, all of those things. So I guess that's the thing that I've really been resonating about and thinking about daily is how do I show up? What are the ways that I show up? How do I educate others? How do we take action? What are the things that we can do in our day-to-day lives to talk about this? And it's really interesting to watch my whole family kind of orientate themselves. They're not political. I'm the one that does that. But it's just these moments where I'm seeing a lot of people that aren't political really start to understand these issues. And it's really been amazing for me to see so much amazing organizing. And I just feel like it's a moment we've been thinking about for a long time in terms of seeing like different active movements in Canada come together. And that's been really important. So I think that's all I have to say. My apologies for being a little out there and hot and sweaty mess. But thank you for listening. And I really hope that you'll take some organizing and some inspiration home with you, and that you'll witness, you'll do actions, you'll do everything that you can to help. Because I really believe at the end of the day, when we're doing actions and we're taking power back, we're helping ourselves too, right? Like, we're always helping ourselves. Like, we're learning, we're building relationships, we're doing all of these things. So it's not You know, I come from a place where everything's all about the individual, right, instead of the collective. Like, we're taught to think that way. So I'm really excited about movements that can start thinking collectively, where indigenous rights and Palestinian rights are the same thing, where human rights are holding up indigenous rights and the rights of other people. So I have some hope in the darkness, and that's what I hope to leave you with, that you'll take action and be that light in the darkness.
Real quick, y'all, just in direct response to Heather, protests are not enough. Protests are a great way to get involved. They're a great way to meet new people. I would urge you to use spaces, so I said this earlier, use spaces like this to meet new people. Find a political home like a PYM, like an organization that is dedicated to things like land back, and actually find other ways to get involved. So what does it mean to have a protest, but then maybe shut something down with that protest, to take actual actions that will disrupt status quo? Because a protest is a great way to show volume, but it doesn't work if we're just allowing, for example, police escorts to drive us down a specific street. We need to actually disrupt things. And so that's where we are in this world, in this phase of genocide, but also globally. The more things we're able to shut down, the less things are able to be run as usual. And that's how change comes about, especially when we're not in political leadership positions. So just a quick tactic there. Please organize and get involved with each other and meet new people, and then organize in that way. Sorry, thank you.
Thank you, Heather. We'd finally love to introduce Rania Herrera from the Young Arab Feminist Coalition. Rania.
Hello, everyone. I would like to start by saying that I'm standing here in front of you as a human, and I want you to humanize us. Open your hearts and listen closely to what I'm going to be saying, because I'm angry, and a lot of us are mad. We're upset that feminists and human rights defenders and land defenders don't perceive us as humans. I'm upset that our own narrative is owned by other people, that we don't get to say our story. That's why I'm here. I'm here to explain to you that this militarized genocide is a feminist issue, that this militarized genocide is an environmental issue, it's an economic justice issue. And I want you to understand that this militarized genocide is a war against indigenous people. It's a war against our land, our women, our men, and our children. In Palestine, 70% of the victims, 70% of people who are killed are women and children. 500,000 women who are in need of reproductive health services don't have access to them. 50,000 women are pregnant. We have 150 women who deliver every day. And yet the world seems to not see us as humans. The world seems to not care as much. And I'm here to call you, to call on you, to call your leaders, to call your representatives. Disrupt, as Tariq said, disrupt the daily habits, disrupt the daily routines, because that's when they're going to start taking actions. The facts are already there. The images are there. I don't need to be showing you pictures, telling you numbers, and justifying myself for you to understand that my people are dying. I'm tired. I'm really tired that feminists don't understand the gender-based violence that women have to go through in Palestine, the violence that women have to go through every checkpoint, the violence that we have to go through in prisons. Not only our women, but also our children who are sexually abused, harassed, assaulted, like Ahmed Manasra, who's still in prison at the age of 21. He's been there since he was 13. If we care and we claim to care about women that much, that we should care about ending the occupation. We should care about ending the settler colonialism that is happening in Palestine. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for bringing these perspectives at the intersection of demilitarization, the climate crisis, and feminism. I'm really excited now for the conversation we want to start. So first, a few discussion questions for everyone, and then if there's time, a few audience questions. So some of you have touched on this already. When we see the number of women, children, schools, hospitals, care workers being attacked in Palestine, we are seeing an unprecedented targeting of the institutions of care, targeting of women and children in the siege on Gaza. When we talk about demilitarization as a feminist issue, what does that mean to you in terms of how women, LGBT, and gender nonconforming people are impacted by war and militarized violence? And what are feminist solutions to militarization?
I can start. So we know that women are not, they don't have the freedom to movement. They're denied access to education. There's a lot of gender-based violence happening. And I'm not gonna come here and sit and propose little solutions. For me, the biggest feminist solution would be land back and end of the occupation. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. I think too that the role that feminism plays in this work is that a lot of the time when we're talking about environmental impacts or the way military impacts indigenous communities is that we aren't looking at issues around reproductive justice. Because as all of the panelists here spoke to, reproduction is carrying on, you know, our people, our lineage, and with that lineage, we are carrying so much with us. We are carrying genetic and historic memory, blood memory that has been passed on through generations and generations, and that lineage is now being disrupted by militarism, by climate change, by environmental impacts, by issues relating to public health. And so it will behoove a lot of people in this room to continue talking about climate change as a reproductive justice issue, talk about militarism as also as a reproductive justice issue as well. So I'll end there. Thanks.
I guess the one thing I could add is, at the end of the day, feminism is rooted in offering women and folks, anybody who identifies as such, to be able to have autonomy over their bodies, to be able to have access to self-determination and lead lives they want to lead. That's impossible in a genocide. That's impossible in a military state. That's impossible in so many contexts across the world. And so to be feminist, to be even environmentalist when we think about COP28, you cannot truly be any of these things if you don't root yourself systemically in the work of upholding and valuing every life and ensuring that the work you do is rooted in people's lives and people's livelihoods. And so I think we see a lot of rhetoric, whether it's greenwashing or I don't know what the word for like feminism washing is. But we see a lot of things where people are saying, oh, well, you know, the Israeli military offers so much paid time off for expecting mothers, but murders every mother, right? And so every mother they can get their hands on. And so I don't see how one can have a truly just movement in any of these spaces if they're not actually advocating for the lives of people on the ground. But even to go a step further, we'll say this in the next question. Let's go. I'll say it a little more later. I'm done with that sentence.
Okay. So as we continue to fight for a permanent and lasting ceasefire in Palestine, we know that the current genocide unfolding is against the backdrop of 75 plus years of occupation backed by the US government and supplied by weapons manufacturing corporations. We also know the US military is the single largest institutional emitter of climate pollution in the world. So how do you see climate change and militarization as intertwined? And how do we push governments like the US to confront demilitarization and climate crisis together?
This is the perfect part too. I did not realize this was the next question, and this is what I was going to say, so I'm glad we're here. So just to continue on what I just said, we didn't directly say this. We talked a lot about the aggression happening after October 7th and the violence in which, and the ways in which the violence has created uninhabitable conditions for Palestinians on the ground. But we haven't talked about demilitarization specifically yet, which is to say, what does it mean for us to live in a world where weapons manufacturers are publicly traded stocks, What does it mean to exist in a space where people are literally playing the slots with our lives, right? To have a war like this, plenty of people are investing in companies like Elbit Systems, like all of these weapons manufacturers, and making a profit on the death machine. And so things and tactics we can take are, like I said, with protests isn't enough. Go protest these buildings, make it difficult for people to enter them and do their jobs. If your job is rooted in creating a system and if your job is rooted in providing the material conditions and the material weaponry for murdering other people, what kind of job is that to be having in the first place? And so we see a lot of rhetoric around job creation. I think, I can't remember where it was, maybe it was Arizona, I believe, but there was a lot of manufacturers that were like trying to create jobs, but what does it mean to create a job that is directly responsible for the murder of hundreds, if not thousands of people? And so similarly, when we think about indigenous land in Turtle Island or in the adjacent territories, how do we actually exist in these spaces knowing that we're being leveraged in the cogs of a machine that kill us all? I think we've talked about green worlds, greenwashing, making this world safe, this isn't directly tied to environmental justice, but it is more broadly tied to all of the causes together. If we are unable to stop a genocide in 2023, we have allowed the world to be reset in a way that sets a precedent for the violence that occurs moving forward. The violence that happens in Gaza is not unique. It started with indigenous folks in Turtle Island. It starts in all of these spaces where when a power or an occupying force or an empirical group or group rooted in empire pushes the boundary of what they can get away with, they allow themselves to continue to push that boundary with more and more people over time, and then we become expendable. And so what I think people sometimes don't understand, and I can see like the fear when we think about, for example, people being fearful of being called anti-Semitic. They're like, well, people didn't show up for my community. And the question isn't who didn't show up for you in the past, it is what prevented them from being able to even be mindful of or know about your community, right? Technology has been a tremendous boon in terms of allowing us to share information, to learn about each other's struggles, to make solidarity happen more effortlessly. And so I think not of the ways in which the empire prevented us from rallying together in the past, and I think about how can we rally together moving forward in the future. Because if we can let this happen in 2023, we're truly doomed. But in an optimistic sense, if we're able to stop a genocide in 2023 collectively together, we reset human history in a lot of ways. We've created a blueprint by which we can find liberation not just for Palestinians, but for indigenous folks across the world, and therefore create a tapestry of liberation for all of us to truly embody and uplift and uphold for the rest of our lives. So just an optimistic take. Shut down weapons manufacturers, don't support politicians who in any way accept funding or any kind of rhetoric on job creation or whatnot from weapons manufacturers. If you see a politician who is comfortable with genocide, ensure that they never get reelected ever again. Also your institutions. If your institution hasn't said anything, so for example, I'm a writer as well as being an organizer, I see a lot of these literary institutions that say things like, we create space for people to share their narratives and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, if you say that in your mission statement and you haven't come out against genocide even once, your foundation is built on lies. And your silence is complicit in genocide globally. And even if you're not saying anything about this genocide, there's the Uyghur genocide, there's the Tigray massacres that were happening in Africa. There's so many things happening across the world. There's always an opportunity. I don't want people to say, oh, well, I didn't take a stance as an organization. Well, we didn't take a stance as an organization against Tigray. Why would we do it for Palestine? Actually, the rhetoric should be, and this is what I was saying, it's not about what we did, it's what we should do. Oh, maybe this is the perfect opportunity, as Heather was mentioning, being freed from certain things. This is the perfect opportunity for me to take a stance. In fact, I should go back and revise everything I've ever not said and ensure that I course correct and take stances everywhere. And any institution you're a part of or have adjacency to that doesn't do that must be held accountable and must be, I don't want to go as far as to say shaming, but they must be held accountable in such a way that they do not get your business, they do not get your patronage, they do not get to operate as usual, because what we're signaling is it's okay for them to be comfortable with genocide when these institutions are the stalwarts and the guiding lights to a lot of what we do. I'm sorry for rambling so much, but thank you. So.
I think I just want to add like to add a caveat to what you're saying is that your feminism, it needs to have an internationalist analyst. You know, you need to be an internationalist in order for you to practice things like global solidarity, because that is going to be necessary to address militarism at mass. We need to learn our real histories, like much of what Heather was talking about. A lot of the times our countries really do change the way that we learn about our history in order for us to be complicit or illiterate to like what's actually happening. Because genocide really does require so many things. It requires resource extraction, it requires exploitation of labor, it requires all of our consumerism. And so in order for us to have a global mobilized movement against genocide that is happening in Palestine and all over the world, it is important to reflect and look back at your teachings, and if you feel like you have not learned your real history of the nation state that you come from, that is going to be an incredibly important place to start.
I think this question is really good because the United States is definitely afraid of the power of the people because they are passing a lot of BDS laws. In fact, I live in a state in Montana where it is legal to fire someone that is anti-Israel. That is, I think there are actually, the last count, 37 states in the United States, in this free country, you cannot speak out against the genocide or anything negative against the Zionist state. You could lose your job. There are lots of legal consequences for this. To have signs, to wear the flag, you can be fired. When the United States government, when any government passes laws that restrict your freedom, it's because they're afraid. So this is going to be a strategy, and I really struggle with this. You know, I mean, there are a lot of people that are saying, contact your reps. Yeah, contact your reps. But like Tariq was saying, capitalism is one of the main reasons why this is happening, and finding out the boycott lists, which are pretty long, and also giving business to Palestine businesses. We have to also look at that. There are a lot of Palestine businesses. You know, let's give money to them, and let's take money out of the economies that support genocide. Thank you.
So I think, like for me, I'm the former director of the Canadian Indigenous Tar Sands campaign. If you know what the tar sands are, they're one of the biggest oil and gas developments on Earth. It's one of the biggest development projects on Earth. You can see it from space. It's massive. It's in the neighboring province. It's a massive deposit of oil and gas. The problem is that it's like sand mixed with oil, so it's really hard to refine. And what's interesting is that tar sands oil is easier to refine for military use than for cars, than for like societal consumption. And I think for myself, there's a direct link between resource extraction and military, right? And I think, you know, I was really thinking, we had a call with folks from Indigenous people from all over the globe, and you know, a friend from Guam was saying, our elders understand because we were carpet bombed, you know, and they're a military outpost. And I think that's the thing to think about, that the Kingdom of Hawaii, same thing, military outpost, right? And we know that like the part of empirism is creating these places, you know, so that these armies can operate and the military can operate. And I think it's just really interesting, you know, coming from the territory that I do, that's where the police was created in Canada was in my territory because we fought back. And my own people have forgotten how to fight. After 150 years of residential school, we've been beaten down. And I think it's interesting, you know, that the US, like the military in the south of the border recruits in Canada, you know, and they recruit Black, brown, and Indigenous people, young people. They recruit our brightest and best stars in our communities. And I think there's also an economic question to this, right? Our people join the military because they want to go to college. They want to get off the res. They want an economic option, right? But when they come home, they're not the same. And I think that's the thing that I've really appreciated a lot of the work from former veterans that we've seen, really calling out the military. And you know, we're starting to see more campaigns in the US that are targeting Indigenous communities and Black and brown communities around the military and joining the military. So, you know, for me, there's a lot of different ways to connect this, both historically and present day. I think that's where a lot of us feel this deep need to do something as well, because we understand what it means for the US and other countries to come in and build a military outpost and what that means. You know, for us historically, that was having a fort where the RCMP and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police came, right? So it's the same thing. It's just a new day, new weapons, new things. I think the challenge is we've been trying to stop things at the source. So trying to shut down the tar sands, trying to stop oil and gas development. I also live south of one of the biggest nuclear deposits in probably the world that's being developed, right? And they're all saying like, yellow cake isn't for weapons, it's not weapons grade. But you know, we know that probably isn't true, right? And so it's just really, you know, Indigenous people in Canada particularly have a certain set of rights that's recognized within the Constitution. And we've been really trying to use those rights to stop development projects. We're probably the only people in Canada that actually have the legal power to do so. So, you know, we're always looking for strategies to work with other people to try and stop one of the root causes of militarization, of genocide, of settler colonialism, and all of these things, right? And for us, the connection with climate is fossil fuels. It's also, you know, in my province, you know, nuclear is being used as the solution to climate change. And all of these things are problematic. And I really feel like we have a great challenge to think and to activate and get ourselves out of this, you know, and I think that's the thing that I think about a lot. Like, one thing is to take the system down, but what do we put in its place? And I think that's the thing that I've been thinking about a lot. Like, I'm not telling people that they have to leave Canada, but I want a Canada that respects my rights. I want a Canada that respects the land. I want a Canada that respects the territories and the original instructions that we were asked to live on, right? And I think, like, we talk about land back, but it's really so much deeper than that, you know? We really want our territories to be respected. And I think when our territories are respected, people respect each other. You know, we can live in a different way, and it's challenging to undo colonialism, right? There's no pathway out. There's no set of instructions or like, these are the things that you need to do when you organize your campaign to get out of colonialism. There's not a pathway out. We have to figure it out. And it's not easy work. It's trial and error. It's struggle. It's failure. It's learning. It's all of these things. So I really feel like, you know, for me, it's looking at the whole picture. It's not just like we have to fight, but we also have to build. We need our artists, we need our musicians, we need everyone on board, our engineers, our scientists, our healers, our birth workers, our language speakers, all of the facets of society, we need to be able to rebuild that. So when we say land back, we're not just talking about the land, we're talking about the whole essence of our society. So that's what we're hopeful for. But that doesn't mean that we expect, you know, that the country of Canada is going to disappear and all the people are going to leave. That's not the point. The point is to live in a different way with the land and to respect the territory. So I hope that to see that globally, you know, because that's really what we need on a global scale. We have to change.
So we are here at COP28. We face the conditions in the international climate negotiations where bringing up demilitarization in the formal negotiations is either taboo or seen as unserious. Since the Kyoto Protocol, military emissions have been omitted from climate pollution reduction targets. How do you all think we can leverage spaces like these to confront countries like the US and wealthy countries to address militarization, pollution, and war? And do we have any leverage with world leaders here, given the moment we are in?
I'm gonna start because yesterday morning we had, was it yesterday? Okay. The days are going by so fast. Yesterday morning we had an action really close to the negotiations room regarding demilitarization and asking for it. And I think our leaders and these world leaders don't want demilitarization because it gives them the biggest amount of profit. They don't want us to bring it up to the conversation. They also don't want us to see the intersection between demilitarization and climate change because money, because economy, because profit. And I think what we should demand, we should show up to these actions. We should write to our representatives. We should, if we see them, confront them. They're there to serve us. Like, we gave them these positions. We have the right to ask them out and call them out for their inaction, for their silence. So I think that what we should do is like keep showing up, organizing, showing up to these demonstrations, showing up to these actions, reaching out to your representatives and calling them out and holding them accountable, because it's time that COP also takes demilitarization into consideration.
Mm-hmm. So we are seeing a continued siege after the so-called pause last week, now all across the Gaza Strip, including the south, where people were forced to evacuate to. We have all seen the thousands of deaths of Palestinians, including over 6,000 children killed in this siege, while hundreds of thousands of Palestinians are being starved and don't have clean water and are subject to disease. This is genocide taking place, and the situation is dire. What hope do you have in this moment? And what can we all do to continue to fight for justice for Palestine?
I actually have to go, y'all, after this answer. I'm sorry for leaving early. I'm a steward for one of the events happening 10 minutes ago. But, you know, it also hopefully illustrates that this is all interconnected. I'm here as a Ghazawi, but I'm also here for all of us in ways where I think a lot of other communities or other entities dedicated to, you know, oppressive regimes don't care about other people. So with that said, in terms of optimism, it's a dire situation. Our journalists are being murdered. Our healthcare workers are being killed. I haven't named this in a public setting yet, but I mean, I have extended family who has been killed, if not entirely displaced. And they're some of the most powerful voices. One of my relatives had just been talking about how a reporter asked them, you know, will you be fleeing away from Shiva Hospital? And he said, why would I do that? Do you think I became a doctor to care for myself? I'm here for my people. I'm here for everybody to be saved. And then just about several days later, he was murdered with his father-in-law and brother-in-law and a family of 20. So there's a lot of targeting happening. It's a very dire situation, but I have to believe that we have it in us to offer Gaza endurance. My friend Adrien, she's a Palestinian poet, and she said, we owe it to Gaza, we owe it to Palestine, we owe it, honestly, to everybody to have our endurance. And that means take care of yourself where you can in order to continue this fight and to continue this work of witnessing. But also, I would go a step further and say, with this witnessing, who are you educating? Who are you pulling along with you? Who are you bringing into the spaces you enter? And how is that informing the work that you do and the way you live? So I think spaces like this are very daunting. They sap us a lot of hope, especially when we think of how we aren't always in the same spaces as leaders. There's a lot of segregation in conferences like this, as we see segregation in the world. But we're all in this room, right? This room has been almost entirely full until people had to start leaving for other things. And I have to believe that the fever pitch will come where the world is run truly by the people and for the people. And so maintain optimism, because we have no choice but to win. We have no choice but to succeed in terms of liberating all of us. And if we fail, at least we fail together. but I'm very optimistic that we won't fail, especially when we have not just the truth on our side, but each other on our side. Thank you.
Yeah, it's very hard to be optimistic when you're seeing a humanitarian crisis and genocide unfold right before our eyes. But what I do see in this space, particularly this year, is the presence of young people who are making the connections to militarism, to capitalism, to climate change, to imperialism. There is a very large global mobilized movement of young people that do want to see change and do want their activism to make impact. And so I'll end there. Thanks.
You know, Indigenous people have lived through many apocalypses, and hopelessness is not a luxury that we have, because we, as Tariq said, we owe it to the people of Palestine to have hope when they don't. They have survived 70 years. It's our job to hold that hope, to keep that light alive, and to not look away. It's our job to continually uplift the voices of those that are not heard, that are silenced and oppressed. It's our job, as Tariq said, to stand with all those that are oppressed around the world. Hopelessness is not a luxury that we are allowed. Thank you.
Well, I really like to think about strategy. You know, I like to think about what are the things that we could possibly do. And I think the thing that in this moment, like I was saying earlier, like the mask has come off. We know who settler colonial countries are, right? We know who they are. And it's very clear. And they're not shy about it anymore. They're very in your face. And I'm really very happy about that. But I think the challenge in a space like this is that we know what we're going to get is at best bare minimum, right? Bare minimum at best if we're lucky. You know, for a lot of Indigenous folks, maybe they'll have Indigenous people in the documents. Maybe they'll hear our voice. Maybe they'll take a recommendation on Article 6.4. You know, maybe they'll think about the recommendation to pushing finance out of the World Bank. You know, all of these different things that we're pushing for. But I think that the thing that I feel most challenged is that in this day and age, we really understand power, right? And I think one of the things that I think about is that, you know, we think there's this idea that the UN can do something, that the UN is effective, and it's this tool that we should use. And I'm not saying it's not. I think it's effective at certain things, like it's bringing all of us together. That's really important and key. However, when we start thinking about power, we also need to think about who has power in this moment. And I honestly tell a lot of our people back home, it's really important to think about corporate power, right? And really challenging corporate power, because in this day and age, corporations have more power than our governments do. Our governments are puppets that are being pulled in the best interests of corporations, right? If you look to Canada particularly, our climate action plan doesn't mention oil and gas, right? Gee, I wonder why that could be, you know? And I think that's a thing that I really want to go back to this idea around organizing and strategy. It's really like, what's the root cause? Who's doing this? They have a name, they have an address, they're probably sitting on a corporation board. These are probably the 1%, people that are very rich, right? These are the people that are holding the strings. And I really think that, you know, in this day and age, we can't just go after governments, we have to go after the corporations that are controlling them, whether or not that's oil and gas companies, whether or not that's nuclear companies, or the military defense companies, all of these different things. But we really need to figure out that strategy where we're going after the corporations and holding them to account. But I also was talking with someone yesterday and they were talking about, like, imagine that we could go after a corporation and if it violates rights or if it does something wrong, that it has to shut itself down. You know, like, wouldn't that be amazing if we could say to ExxonMobil, like, you can't do what you're doing, or to Rockwood, one of these defense companies, you violated human rights, so therefore you have to shut yourself down because you've done something that is beyond a fine. Because I think that's the thing that's always challenging within the UN is like there's fines. There's things that happened in court and they get a slap on the hand. And we, as people, like we really, need to think about the strategy about how we want to move forward. Because to me, like if that's something that you want to do is you want to take down the system, we need to really think about the corporation's role in these kinds of environments, right? Usually in the past, when there's a COP, there's a whole trade market that happens with all the major companies all over the globe have their own version of COP. They're here to make money, to make deals, right? And we know that. We see our government meeting with the heads of corporations. So I just wanted to put that out there. I'm excited about people being really strategic in this moment, really going after the folks that are really, truly responsible for this, and I think that's really important for us to think about who those people are and the ways that we can strategize to hold them to account. Because it's not just governments, and I think our governments also are funded by these people too, right? Particularly where I'm from. So I just want to put that out there. I know that's probably a really super nerdy strategist think tank kind of thing to say, but those are the kinds of things that I get excited about. I get really excited about this idea of us building a new world and moving forward in a new direction and trying new things. So I really hope that you'll find the space and place that makes you excited to do this work, and that we move forward in a really good way. So thank you so much for being here.
We might have time for 1 or 2 questions from the audience.
Thank you very much. First of all, it was a very good session that I have attended today. Thank you very much listening to all of you. I saw myself there. I saw my peoples, because the real things are there. What they say in other events, they are just bluffing. They don't, they don't mention the right thing because they are involved in it. Without human rights, there is no climate justice. Because we share the same sky, we share the same land. If humans die, all of them will die. If we need survival, then we need all of us would survive this thing. First of all, I would like to introduce myself. Myself is Maran Baloch, and I'm a practicing doctor and a political and social rights activist. I'm representing Balochistan, occupied and colonized by a South Asian country, Pakistan. It's very hard, the humanity, what we are facing. It was very hard for me. It was very hard for us to understand that because they have made this thing. What we are living, we have been isolated from the world. We have been stuck to our old problems. I've been seeing all of those things, but what my question is from all of you, that what I've seen, the emotions, the pain, that all of this world is, fed of violence. What they are earning from us, we need to stand against them. We need to stand for each other. The right to live is the biggest right, and one that doesn't own this right, all of the rights are abolished. We need to understand this thing. But my question is this, sorry, because my language is not good, I'm not good in English. So, that how do we face the propaganda industry of this global world? Because what I see that the value of human life is demolished. We don't value human lives. When there are genocide, then we go, yeah, this thing is viral. We have to speak on this. Palestine is occupied for 70 years. And just like other nations, just like the rights, indigenous people rights, but we don't talk on them. We are just sleeping our dreams. But when there are thousands of people die, then we say, oh yeah, we need to talk. And how do we organize this? How do we face this? It's my own question, that why we don't
value a single life. Why we are waiting for them to butcher us, why we are waiting for them to kill us as a nation, and then we will mourn on them. So how do we face this? How do we organize movements? How do we keep our people that please don't get used to it? They are humans. We have given them power. The majority of the world doesn't want wars. The majority of the world is fed up of wars. The majority of the world want peace. The minority that are ruling us, that wants war. So thank you very much, and I hope, and thank you very much for listening, and thank you very much for a wonderful session. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a really big question. I don't really have an answer. I think, the thing that really, I feel really challenged by is this idea of peace, because I come from a place where arguably it's peaceful, but that doesn't mean that peace is just, right? And I think that's the thing that we're trying to get to, is we want peace that's just, right? And I think that's the hardest question, is like, how do we get to that point during a genocide? And multiple genocides, right? Because Palestine is just one thing that's going on, right? And so I don't have the answers. I think we have to figure it out together in our communities. I think we have to fight back. I think the other thing that we've been talking about a lot is, like, with the boycott, we really need to buy local. We need to create local economies so that we're not serving these systems, right? Because if capitalism is one of the root causes, like, they came to our territory for the land, but also for the resources, right? And so one way to chop that root off is to not make it effective anymore, right? And I know that a lot of folks are like, I really like to eat my mangoes in February in Canada, but it's just ridiculous, right? So it's really thinking about, like, local food systems and reinvigorating, again, this idea of having a good relationship with the land. A big part of that's food. A big part of that's also, the way we do so many different things. And I would just encourage you to think creatively. And I know that all of these ideas are not new things. People are doing them in communities all over the globe. Like, we are not alone in this struggle, and I think that's the thing that also resonates. Like, if we're doing actions and trying to do things in Canada, that's happening in South America and in Brazil and in Asia and in the Arctic, in all of these places. We're all doing something. And I think oftentimes we don't realize that we have more power than we think we do. We're fighting this propaganda machine that's global, that says that we're not effective, and I think we really are. One thing, Ariel's here from the community of Athabasca Chippewa First Nation, but it was kind of funny because there was 5 women in Canada that took on the tar sands, and some of the biggest oil companies that made the most money in the history of money, right? But they were successful. They've had a lot of wins against this massive development, and that's 5 young women that started organizing. So I think, like, you can have a big difference, in the work that you're doing just by working together and figuring out some of these strategy pieces. But I can't tell you what to do. I can only tell you what we know works where we're from, and that's going to look different where you're from, right? I think the thing that governments like to do is they like to be like, well, this project worked here, so we're just going to replicate it all over the globe, and it just doesn't work, right? It doesn't work for the land, doesn't work for the people. So really encourage folks to think about, like, how to take down capitalism and how to take down all of these things, because they're really the root cause of all of our problems.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, this panel here was curated by, participation from Indigenous peoples, and there is an urgent paradigm shift that needs to happen in terms of how we're viewing the natural world. And the Indigenous Peoples Caucus, as well as, like, the Indigenous people that aren't even here, need to be more centered. And this is, like, also a call out for, like, non-Indigenous people, is like, there needs to be a decentering of Western, white, imperial sort of ideals and, I guess, values. I wouldn't really call them values, because capitalism, imperialism, and militarism seems to be the drivers behind a lot of government systems. And so in order for us to reclaim, rematriate, and live like back in balance and harmony with the natural world, that is going to take Indigenous leadership to be centered instead of us following these white supremacist sort of actions that have got us into this issue into the first place. So.
Okay, we're running out on time. Are there any last minute remarks from any of our panelists?
I just wanted to reiterate that we are powerful and that collectively, networking, and I really appreciate your question, and I think that some of your question was an answer, and we have these answers within ourselves, and our elders have answers as well, and we just have to keep on connecting with each other and seeing each other as human. Like what you brought up, the dehumanization, that campaign has been going on for so long. There was the saying in the United States, kill the Indian, save the man, which justified kidnapping Indigenous children and putting them into residential schools, boarding schools. And this imperialistic tactic happened all over the world. It wasn't just in North America, it happened in Canada, it also happened in India. So I really appreciate you, Relative, for bringing that question. And I appreciate all of you in the audience for attending this. This was a really important topic, and thank you for giving us your time.
Thank you so much to our panelists. We want to encourage everyone to join actions wherever you are, at home, if you're watching online, and here at COP28 in solidarity with our Palestinian siblings to demand a ceasefire and an end to genocide. So there's going to be a global day of action on December 9th here, and we encourage everyone to participate. There's going to be a mass cross-constituency action taking place on that day, which also happens to be the International Day of Recognition and Prevention of Genocide. So thank you everyone for coming. Yes, let's go.